The drone of the pumps started at dawn, a relentless, mechanical buzzing that felt like a drill boring into the quiet soul of our community. They were actually doing it, weren't they? How in God's name could the Homeowners Association Board, led by that absolute tyrant Brenda, vote 7-0 to drain Lake Serenity, the sparkling 50-acre heart of our valley, for 50 years, all over some bogus, unsubstantiated flood risk report she'd commissioned from a consultant who clearly needed a vacation home? I stood on my old dock, the ancient, weathered planks groaning beneath my sneakers, watching the water level drop by the hour, feeling a cold, sick certainty pool in my stomach. This wasn't about flood prevention. This was about Brenda's $8 million Mediterranean mansion and the 5 other McMansions like it that had sprung up in the last 3 years, crowding the old established homes like mine. They wanted more beach, more view, and they thought a lower lake level meant higher property values. Oh, the arrogance of the newly rich. My hands were shaking as I clenched them into fists, the air thick now with the heavy, organic smell of exposed lakebed. A pungent, sulfurous aroma of death and mud that hadn't seen daylight in half a century. I remembered the town hall meeting, just 6 weeks ago, the way Brenda had smiled, a tight, thin-lipped crescent, as she dismissed my engineering neighbor, old Mr. Harrison, who had tried to explain the inherent risks. Mr. Harrison, we appreciate your quaint, antiquated understanding of hydraulics. She'd purred into the mic, her voice dripping with condescension. But this is a state-of-the-art geo-assessment. The fact is, the original construction on your side of the lake predates modern safety standards. We, the new guard, are simply ensuring the longevity and security of the entire community. She'd pointedly emphasized your side, the old, quiet side, the side that didn't have infinity pools spilling onto the lakefront. I wanted to scream, to ask her, are you seriously comparing a $5,000 consultant fee to the irreplaceable biodiversity of this entire ecosystem? What planet are you living on? But Brenda lived in a different world, one where you simply paid enough people to ignore facts. She and her cronies, who all happened to live on the steepest, most recently developed stretch of shoreline, had bought into the consultant's fear-mongering. The lake, which had been stabilized at that elevation since the reservoir was created, was somehow a ticking time bomb. The truth, the grim truth Mr. Harrison had tried to articulate, was that the new mansions were built on notoriously unstable, uncompacted fill dirt. The only thing keeping that steep, newly cut hillside stable was the constant, immense hydrostatic pressure exerted by the deep water of Lake Serenity pressing back against it. The water was not the risk. It was the buttress. And they were draining the buttress. 3 days later, the lake was a miserable, sprawling swamp, reduced by 70%. The shoreline was now a cracked, sucking moonscape of gray clay. The old dock was useless, hovering 20 feet above the muck. The silence, after the pumps finally shut off, was a sick kind of quiet, broken only by the mournful cries of displaced birds and the occasional pop as a bubble of methane burst in the drying mud. Every breath I took was a sigh of frustrated exhaustion. My beautiful lake, my home, ruined by a woman who thought she knew better. I sat on my porch, watching the sunset cast a mournful orange glow over the newly exposed, desolate banks, and I felt nothing but utter defeat. Was there truly no justice for simple common sense? Then came the sounds. They started slowly the following afternoon. Not the loud, sudden crash of failure you hear in movies, but a deep, subterranean groan, like a giant turning over in its sleep. I stepped out, frowning, straining my ears. The sound was coming from the West Ridge, Brenda's side. Did you hear that? I muttered to the empty air. The sound happened again, longer this time, a sickening, low-frequency crunch of concrete shearing. I grabbed my binoculars and focused on the massive stucco monstrosity that was Brenda's prized $8 million home. It stood there, enormous, gleaming in the late afternoon sun, and then, subtly, undeniably, something changed. The retaining wall supporting her meticulously manicured backyard, the one she'd extended 10 feet further toward the water than zoning allowed, cracked. Not just a hairline fracture, but a jagged, horrifying zigzag that ran from the top down to the foundation. "Oh my God!" I whispered, my heart slamming against my ribs. The ground, now released from the stabilizing weight of millions of gallons of water, and no longer receiving the outward pressure of the lake, was beginning to slump. It wasn't the lake flooding her home. It was the earth itself failing, pulling her poorly built dream downward. The next hour was cinematic horror. The initial groan gave way to the sharp, snapping report of timber and steel cables ripping apart. The back half of Brenda's colossal house, the entire kitchen wing and the master suite, didn't just collapse. It slowly, agonizingly, slid. It slid downhill through the shattered retaining wall into the exposed, newly saturated marshland. Her infinity pool, the one she was so proud of, tipped, and the water cascaded not into the lake, but into the foundation trenches, mixing with the unstable clay and turning the entire area into a massive, bubbling, muddy landslide. I could hear screaming now, high-pitched and hysterical. Was that Brenda? Did she really think her contractor could defy geology just because she paid him in cash? By the time the fire trucks and emergency crews arrived, the scene was catastrophic. Brenda's mansion, along with 2 of the other $8 million homes along the same stretch of hill, had fractured irreparably, their foundations buried deep in the newly formed muddy swamps. One of the homes looked like a grotesque cake, split down the middle and leaning precariously, its French doors gaping at the muddy abyss. The other 5 new mansions were immediately red-tagged, deemed unstable. The engineers on site, real engineers this time, were shaking their heads in disgust. The official report, which was leaked 2 days later, confirmed everything. Removing the lateral support of the lake had triggered a massive slope failure along the entire stretch of uncompacted fill used for the new developments. Brenda, standing in the middle of her now-ruined driveway, covered in mud, frantically screaming into a satellite phone about her lawyers, was no longer the composed Homeowners Association tyrant. She was just a woman whose greed had cost her everything, and whose flood risk plan had, ironically, caused an $80 million localized disaster. The irony was a punch to the gut, but also a surge of pure, powerful relief. Justice was messy, smelly, and slow, but it was coming. The entire Homeowners Association board resigned immediately, faced with a tsunami of lawsuits from their own neighbors. As for Lake Serenity, the pumps were reversed that evening, starting the long, slow, 3-year process of refilling the reservoir. And as I watched the first trickle of fresh water flow back into the barren basin, washing away the stench of corruption, I felt a deep, abiding truth settle in. You can try to control nature, you can try to buy facts, and you can certainly try to drain the beautiful things in life for your own petty gain. But the earth, eventually, always remembers its promises. When you build your kingdom on flimsy foundations of hubris, don't be shocked when the mud decides to claim it back.